Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Champions Path, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using the code Omnipoke. For today's video, I'm going to be going over the Darkness Ablaze set review that we had, because myself and Jack are looking to record the Vivid Voltage set review over the weekend, so we're going to first look back at the past performance of Darkness Ablaze, how we did in our own review, and also look at some of these cards now that we have seen the cards from Vivid Voltage and maybe how they could be changing or if they have any new homes for new upcoming sets. So yeah, always a fun one. We'll be jumping into that. Obviously, I didn't do this for Champions Path because, as we all know, Champions Path was mostly a collector-orientated set with a bunch of reprints and not many impactful cards. It's really stuff like Rotom Phone, Warlord, and Incineroar, which really have any notoriety at all, and they're not really doing too much. So we're jumping into Darkness Ablaze. I've got my YouTube video up rather than the actual slideshow up because I think I deleted it, so just bear with me if I'm sort of struggling to find spots here and there, but regardless, we will start with the Cheer Yell Horn. We rated 1 star, sort of comparing it to the Ear-Ringing Bell, but a more proactive card. And yeah, this card ended up being very poor. I was really clutching at straws for synergies. I think I even mentioned that it could be an additional status condition, and that's not actually the case because you can't be asleep and confused. So this slide basically would have been blank had I not made a mistake. I think it had a small flash in the pan with Vikavolt perhaps, and maybe some controlling variants to try and slow people down, but really this card hasn't seen much play. Lookalike Bell we rated 2 stars. It's actually not even played in the Mad Party archetype, and that was really the only credit we were giving this card, so you can drop this down to a 1 star, not too much changing there. Old Computer still gives me those vibes, still is a terrible card. The rare fossils, all of the fossils did terribly. The only real fossil that's working at the moment is like Aerodactyl-based sort of rogues. But yeah, rare fossils are doing very poorly. Continues with the 1 star, no change there. Turbo Patch, we rated 5 star, mostly for its flexibility and the potential for it to be in a whole heap of decks. And actually, it's really not doing well at all in the meta, which is surprising. There are some people trying to do this to sort of counteract the coin flips of Crushing Hammers. But Turbo Patch isn't seeing a huge amount of play. It was quite quickly dropped from ADP-based variants, which I think a lot of people were sort of assuming it would go into. And more in favor of just higher counts of energy switches and stuff like that to get the early GX attack off. One interesting thing about Turbo Patch potentially is the new Bayonet that we are getting from Vivid Voltage, the devolving type guy. It might lead us to a pure Zacian build, like we saw how Scoop Up Net Jirachi, Mr. Mime combo, Turbo Zacian was an archetype. We could be going back to a Zacian's Amazenta sort of combo deck that has Bayonet in there to devolve things. Well, specifically looking to devolve VMAXs, right? You hit it once with a Brave Blade, they obviously tank that hit. You somehow gust them to the bench with a boss or a Fion or something like that, then the Bayonet devolves them, right? So that 230 damage output, enough to deal with, you know, every V Pokemon. So now stripping away the ADP side and just having Turbo Patches, Saucers, Zacians, and Bayonet could be a new way to play Zacian going forward. But outside of that, I don't see much hope for Turbo Patch. It could see playing a couple other archetypes. Like it's still got that versatility behind it. So I'm not gonna like ever drop this lower than like a 3-star card, but at the moment it's really underperformed from its initial expectation. And yeah, I think that's just based on the fact that it's a straight 50-50. And there are basically more impactful coin flips in the meta right now. Crushing Hammer probably being the one worth making space for. Big Parasol, we rated 3 stars. It pretty much retains that 3-star placement, I want to say, for basically just Decidueye and Altaria-based decks really were the only real ones to sort of con onto this. I remember at the time, myself and Jack sort of rating it this high because it just covers so much that there'll be a point where it's useful. And that's kind of just been the case. Big Parasol actually useful at denying Mewtwo using Muck Muck, which was, again, something that we didn't really have in mind, but the versatility of Big Parasol was the browning points that we were giving it in the first place, and it basically ended up proving itself. Walling archetypes will continue to be a thing because there aren't any real like new wall-breaking cards. Actually, that's not true. There's an Aegislash from Vivid Voltage. So potentially Big Parasol gets worse as the Altaria and Decidueye decks get weaker going forward. So yeah. We have Mountainous Smoke, continues to be a 1-star most likely. There is a tool drop variant from Vivid Voltage, the Whimsicott Garbodor style archetype, and this obviously denies your opponent card advantage, but for the most part, I think the Whimsicott Garb deck wants to be playing a whole heap of tools before these. They want to be playing Giant Bombs, they want to be playing U-turn boards, I think. So stuff like that is probably better than Mountainous Smoke. We rated Toughness Cape a 4-star card. I'm pretty happy to retain this as the 4-star. Pretty much right now, it's not seeing play in like Zacian stuff. It is seeing play in a decent amount of sort of Fire Toolbox decks. It's seeing play for health buff on a few things here and there. Not huge right now, and Spiritomb kind of flopped as well. You know what? You could potentially drop this down to a 3-star just because it's still quite narrow. But it's just one of those cards that's very solid, and going forward is always like an option for every basic V Pokemon out there. It's being played in Warlord as well. So yeah. Struggle Gloves, probably going to continue to be that 1-star. It's, you know, just a card that's bad in your deck in every matchup, but the one that you're already unfavored against. So yeah, it doesn't make too much sense. One of the cards we rated quite harshly was Birdkeeper. My main reasoning for rating it fairly low was thinking that Jirachi was going to be weaker in the format, and in many ways we were correct on that aspect, but Birdkeeper still is a strong enough card to find its way into decks as like a 1 count most of the time, especially if you are playing things like Pokegear or Eldegoss. Some decks are finding the way to make it work. So Pikarom, for example, oftentimes mains a 1 count. Some ADP variants still play 1. I'm not a huge fan of the card. Like, I still don't rate Birdkeeper up in the 4s and 5s. I think it's a solid 3-star card that is an optional one-of if you have some synergy going on in there, and probably will continue to sort of fill that niche as like the 11th supporter in your deck or something like that. You know what I mean? Not in at number 4. We rated Piers 4 stars. Again, we kind of were noting that we didn't actually play it in our early versions of Eternatus, and that's continued to be the case for the most part. There are still some Piers Eterna players, but for the most part, it's not playing Piers. We did sort of note that other archetypes, just trying to use special energies, will try and weave in Crobat and Zigzagoon packages. We haven't seen that too much, actually. I remember trying it with Salamence. Obviously, Salamence was kind of like a flop deck anyways. But there are some new decks that may look to have some specific tutoring for special energy cards. A lot of the amazing rares basically can only work if you're accessing a bunch of like Auroras and a ton of other special energies to make their wacky attack costs work. So that could be a strange sort of backdoor for Piers to see an amount of play again. So for its potential in Eternatus and for its continued versatility, I think we'll just drop it down to the 3-star, but still a solid option. And I can still see a lot of merit behind him. It's just, to be honest, the competition for supporters right now is just ridiculous. You know, Marnie, Research, and Boss are all just super incredible. Kind of overrated Rose. I guess I kind of under-respected how decent like Decidueye would be in the first case, and how relevant it was to actually commit spaces to your deck to have answers to those sorts of things. Most of the time I was building Rose engines, I was just trying to go for a thick VMAX and then like a thick Silvally. And even Jirachi's in there as well, so you could try and get that turn 2 Rose into an attack. That gave you a lot of tempo, but it was like all or nothing, right? Sometimes you just miss your early Rose, and then you may as well have just like manually attached your way through the game anyway. For some of these expensive attackers, you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. Inteleon VMAX got way better alongside the Frostmoth build. I'm kind of glad that I noted Inteleon, even with the Rose package, like wrong package, but right card kind of deal. I remember even in early like tier lists and stuff, I had built Inteleon a few times over thinking that it was going to be the successor to Dragapult, which actually sort of did come true, which is quite interesting for the format, just because Snom was way safer in this format because Dragapult was no longer an archetype and Snom had 50 hit points, so it was gatekept in that regard. And Inteleon was gatekept by Pikarom. Now Pikarom did sort of creep back into the meta as Champion's Path and Darkness Ablaze sort of moved on in the format. So it's still kind of like a risky play right now, but Inteleon definitely does have like a solid place, a more solid place than Dragapult anyway in the current format. But yeah, Rose, there aren't many VMAXs that I'm excited about comboing with Rose in the next set, to be honest with you. So I still think it has too much of a downside, not only to use the card, but whiffing the card is horrific for turn 2, and it's already committing it's really warping your deck, right? Because you need to play a lot of energies, a lot of discarding synergy cards, as well as like high Pokegear and 4 rows, which eats up into a lot of spaces. So that's going to be a handful of headache there to sort of work around for rows to be good. So I'd probably drop this down to like a 2-star. Still has some like niche utility, but super, super niche. Kabu, interestingly enough, has made its way into Magneton Center Scorch or Green Center Scorch. And Tord thinks it's the most optimal way of playing Green Senti is alongside a high count of Kabu. That is a very, very specific deck that can take advantage of this, because there are many situations where this card is a huge hand refresh for a Shuffle 8. Most people, you can see the community and ourselves, we rated it very low because for most traditional archetypes, you don't want this to be the case. You want to commit your early... your early draw is basically just trying to get Pokemon into play, because that's the crux of your setup for the most part. But Kabu sort of fits that strange niche in exactly Center Scorch, where if you don't have a Green's Exploration in the early turns, at least you can Kabu for a very large hand size, and hopefully then get your outs into other stuff. So fits a niche in exactly Green Center Scorch, which I believe to be a tier 2 archetype. So for that, we will give him 3 stars. Going forward, I can't see that changing too much. I don't see any new homes for Kabu going forward. Pokemon Breeders Nurturing, quite overrated by the community for the most part. It's obviously a very terrible card when we have so many good ball search options out there in the format. Glimwood Tangle, we rated 2-star for really its versatility and its options. We didn't really see any seeking energy removal style decks. We didn't see any put your opponent down to 10 hit points remaining sort of decks. We also didn't see Toxtricity really kick on at all. So I would drop this down to a 1-star, were it not for Whale Lord, where it's a guaranteed 4 of. I think optimistically Whale Lord is a 2.5 tier 3 kind of deck. So I will keep Glimwood Tangle at a 3-star. Going forward, I can't remember if there are any important coin flips in the new set. I know there's also Dreadnought VMAX, which is coin flip based, that will probably use Glimwood Tangle, but I don't think that gives it many more brownie points, kind of on the same level as Warlord, if not worse. But yeah, Glimwood Tangle continues to be an interesting option for coin flips. Rose Tower, grossly overrated by the community for the most part. It is definitely not the same as Instruct, because obviously you need to not already need another stadium in your deck. You need to... you need to have already run your opponent out of stadium cards for it to be an out to Reset Stamp and an out to Marnie and those sorts of things. Oranguru is much better of a card for that regard. And if you do want stamp proofing, Jirachi is still probably the best guy you have available to you. Marnie has sort of overtaken Reset Stamp in a lot of archetypes. It's only really things like Mewtwo and Pikarom that are really maining Reset Stamps. Some Eternatus players are, but not all of them. So the format's not really needed the Rose Tower too much, but at the same time, just the fact that you can lose to Celtic Swells, and the fact that you basically always need a different stadium in decks right now. Like, we have so many powerful stadium cards that there's not really much of a look in for Rose Tower. Like, every now and then you'll see it as like a random one-of in a couple of decks, but it's just not enough. You don't really get enough cards out of it. Normally it's like a 1-for-1, so you could just be playing like a Judge's Whistle or something, right? Because you put it down and like your hand size is already holding on 1 or 2 cards. So very rare that you get a huge amount of value from this, and obviously Rose was poor. So I'll drop this to the 1-star, but it does still have some strange situations where it will pop up, but I don't think it's very strong at all. And like I said, if you want stamp proofing mechanisms, there are better things out there now, so something to bear in mind. Spikemuth, we've rated 3 stars. It's actually underperformed, I think, from that expectation. I gave it a fairly generous 3 stars because I thought it had some extra utility where you had some sniping going on in the format. Inteleon instead has moved to things like Viridian and Training Court just to get more energies rolling for that turn to attack, because it's more important than just getting a random 2 counters here or there. The Spiritomb deck has also been a flop. I think just the raw amount of ADP in the format has sort of kept this sort of deck at bay. Also, there is a good amount of Zigzagoon, Scoop Up Net, Inteleon, and other sniping things out there as well. So there's a few headaches that Spiritomb really never got off the ground, a few inconsistency issues there. The Houndoom deck never really kicked on either. So there are some additional synergies going forward. Donphan comes out in Vivid Voltage to improve the Spiritomb archetype in theory, because you gain a bit of type coverage. You gain some better early game pressure in a Pokemon that like obviously isn't Spiritomb, so you can build Spite in the background whilst getting value up front, and your Spiritombs, you know, stay safe to build in the background. So potential for Spikemuth to see play there. But also there could be a move towards Martial Arts Dojo because you're playing Domfan, and Domfan can go to 160 if you're behind on prize cards. So there's potential to want that stadium instead. But yeah, Spikemuth, we'll drop it down to 2 stars, I think. Heat Fire Energy, we're pretty much spot on this one. We said for the most part, Welder decks will continue to just want basic energies because they're broken with Fire Crystal, Half, and Welder Synergy. But it's just good enough to be that 1 or 2 count in the likes of Torkoal V, Centiskorch VMAX at times, and even Reshizard. Interestingly enough, the Greens Reshizard with Breakzard has become a small little like niche archetype as well. Something we didn't really note on the slide, but yeah, I mean, it's a good thing to gain an extra 20 health in this format when there are lots of things looking to one-bop you. Heat Fire can keep you out of range of Eternatus. If you're playing Centiskorch, you know, even if they're shoving a load of Zigzagoons and nets your way, that sort of thing. So the Heat Fire kind of came in as like a maximum 2 count in Fire decks that really wanted to go down a healing or tanking route if it really sort of tended towards that approach. And Ninetales has pretty much fallen off a cliff. People are just bossing these days, which is fair enough, to be honest. So yeah, small side note. High Darkness Energy, we rated 5 stars. It's a really strange one because it's really meta dependent. There's a small back and forth between like how good is Giratina, how good is a Dangerous Drill, this, that, and the other. Obviously, Piers didn't see a huge amount of play. But Eternatus can still quite often main this. I think if you're playing the poison-based build, you're usually playing high Darkness Energies. Dark City as well has come in to sort of give yourself even more retreat cost options. I think because of the sort of small uptick in Pikarom as well as Muck in Mewtwo kind of meant that Eternatus still had to play switch cards. So the high Dark doesn't get the same value that it used to, and it does actually compete with Capture Energy, which is something that I should have really put on the slide. Obviously, I acknowledged Capture Energy in my early Eternatus builds, but I didn't really see it as a competition for Eternatus. I saw it as like an additional option. So I'd probably drop it down to a 4-star because it's not guaranteed in the best deck in format. I thought, one of the best decks in format, right? So it's kind of like a just sort of maybe card. It does still have the utility alongside Obstagoon variants as well, but usually they're also not in a high count. It's only really the Altaria build that will play special energies anyway, because Altaria gets to use Piers, which is kind of cool. Spiritomb obviously doing pretty poorly. Going forward, I don't think there are too many interesting dark things. Nothing that makes me think it's better than Eternatus, so we'll drop this down to a 4-star, mostly because we're worried about special energy hate that people will be teching in to the one attachment sort of meta of Eternatus and how popular it became. Powerful Colorless Energy, how did this card perform? Actually very poorly. It's only really been like saved recently by like, the potential use in Altaria, but Salamence has done terribly, Snorlax hasn't done any better, Double is played in exactly like Welder box variants and isn't trying to main Powerful Colorless like at all. So we'll drop this down to the... I mean, for Altaria's sake, we could keep it a 2-star and not a 1-star. Obviously, in a vacuum, this card is crazy. Are there any interesting colorless cards coming out from the new set? I can only think of like Snorlax and Trumbeak, but neither of those are attackers. There's a new round archetype with X-Bloud, but that has a multiple energy attack cost, so I don't think there's any new colorless attackers. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below. But I don't think there's any new homes for Powerful Colorless going forward. I think, I think that's pretty much it. So yeah, no real new home for this card. So we'll keep it the 2-star, but it's definitely waiting in the wings. I think we've already seen the announcement of Cramorant VMAX. A lot of people looked at this card to make it a bit of a beat stick, so something to bear in mind. Butterfree V and VMAX, obviously terrible. Don't need to spend too much time on that. Decidueye we rated 3-star. I think it's... See, I still don't put this like super high in a tier list. I think it's still quite easy to beat this, and if you do want to tech for it, you're going to still do quite fine. But there has been a decent number of online tournament results for Decigoons. So you could put it in the sort of bottom of tier 2, top of tier 3. So if you want to call this a 4-star card, you can. It does have the competition of Altaria now. I still have seen more results in Decidueye's favor than Altaria's. That's still anecdotal though, and we haven't really seen the same progression of a meta that we're used to because we don't have real tournaments to go off of. It's all just online stuff. So yeah, Decidueye did prove itself to be an annoying headache, and for the most part, it combined with Obstagoon to cover some of its flaws. So yeah, we'll move on to the Sky Circus stuff. Obviously, it was a sort of Mimi deck, and nothing's really going to change that from the new set. Golisopod, we rated 2 stars. We didn't actually put its main partner in crime that we saw, which was Aerodactyl. I do think that's still, on like the budget/fun side of things. I don't think there's anything new coming out in the new set that makes me change my mind on this Golisopod too much. Are there any additional Twin Energy style attackers going forward? I don't think there's anything that really excites me massively. So we'll keep this at the sort of 2-to-1 range where it has the option to come in and swing, but nothing too dangerous. The Simis were obviously poor. Type coverage is a thing, but their raw damage output of 110 isn't really enough to challenge anything new coming out. Blaziken is a stage 2, so that's why it got that rating. Centiskorch V and VMAX, we rated 4 stars. I still think 4 is probably the most fair thing, because it's not an out-and-out 5-star deck. It's still kept in check by Inteleon, Werelord, Dreadnought, those sorts of archetypes to an extent. I think really it still doesn't really boast the strongest matchup against Eternatus either, so it is still kind of gate-kept by a couple of things. I do like that you don't auto-lose to many archetypes outside of the blue stuff. You always have a chance at beating... like the Decidueyes, any annoying walls, Zamazentas, stuff like that, which sometimes, and hammers as well. You're really unfazed by hammers for the most part. So that was a very cool option. I think here I only really noted that there was going to be likely a straight build of Centiskorch and a tanking build of Centiskorch. Completely missed the ball on the combo with Lieutenant Surge and Magneton. I've always been a green skeptic, and to be honest, I still haven't played much of the green Centiskorch build, but it's got a number of tournaments behind it, and I've seen Tord play it enough on stream and seen his win rate with the deck to make me think, yeah, it's a reasonable archetype out there as well. So the fact that Centiskorch is probably the face of 2 different playstyles may make me want to put it towards that 5 category. It's really between that 4 and 5. Is there anything new from Vivid Voltage that changes that too much? I don't think there really is. So, yeah, I think it will continue to be solid. Charizard VMAX, definite flash in the pan. Basically, the prophecy was true. Centiskorch is just a better version of Charizard. There were some highlight reel moments with this card, and we all appreciate that. But yeah, whoever thought this was good really had to... anyone who ever said that Charizard was better than Centiskorch to me, man, how silly do you have to feel right now? Houndoom V was very poor. It really wasn't the updated Drampa Berserk, because Berserk was enough to kill everything. Compensation Flame doing 200 isn't killing anything, basically, outside of hitting for weakness. And combining it with Spiritomb and Jinx when you only draw 3 cards from a welder was asking way too much for a combo variant. So this can go down to a 1-star, very poor. Milotic, yeah, really, really poor, especially because Feebas had such low hit points, it never really stood a chance. Mad Party we rated quite a lot lower than the community. Now, most of Mad Party's results from online tournaments have been in no ADP formats, and that's kind of my main issue, is that you never really could beat ADP, which is a problem, I guess. It was way more consistent than I thought it was initially, and it does get its game plan off enough. But in terms of its actual raw results, it's kept in check by so many things. I don't think it's a particularly strong deck when you need to play so many 2-prize Pokemon to really make the engine work. And again, I don't think there's too much change in the next sets. So, yeah. There's another new kind of scuffed 1-prize deck from the next set, the little Cramorant deck, which may be some extra competition for Mad Party, but we'll see. So yeah, I'd keep Mad Party at 2, because it's better than Binnit, but it's not realizing any potential or winning any tournaments, really, any full open meta tournaments. Relicanth poor, as we know from all the fossils being terrible. Suicune we rated 1 star. This was played in Tord's Inteleon that he used at the Players' Cup as a option to get around Decidueye and other annoying stuff. I think the card doesn't really serve too much of a purpose because I think you can easily still lose that matchup. It can still skew a prize trade for you, which has some reasonable utility. I think this card gets a lot better in the next set because we get the supporter card that gets you back water energies and Pokemon. It's like a Fisherman plus Rescue Stretcher combined. I think it's Nessa, right? The Nessa supporter can loop your Suicune, and because Nessa's a good card in general for these other Frostmoth style decks, I can foresee the one of Suicune actually being enough because you can cycle it with like Nessa and then Eldegoss for Nessa to like make yourself enough Suicunes to then get through those annoying walls. So Suicune will have a better role in the future set as long as Decidueye continues to see play and Nessa sees play in the Moth decks, which I believe it very well could do as at least a one-off copy, especially if you are playing Eldegoss in those builds. So I would bump Suicune up probably to a 2-star going forward, as well as its niche sort of showcase from Tord. Vanilluxe, yeah, we know it's stage 2, etc. We have Dracovish, yeah, obvious 1-star card again. Not too much to say on these, to be honest. Vikavolt, one of the more overrated cards. And I'm always okay overrating than underrating, even when I can't completely build a deck that I'm satisfied with. And there was like definitely flashing red lights to me when I was looking at Vikavolt, because in all of the tabletop simulator games I was having with Vikavolt, it got rolled like quite a lot. It's not that like I didn't win with Vikavolt, but when I lost, I would get rolled because my disruption wasn't enough, or just giving your opponent one turn, even if you've locked them for like 4, was enough for you to just be like destabilized and lose the game because you haven't really built up enough damage or got enough value from those turns that you've taken away from your opponent by disrupting them. We've seen Pikarom come back. Vikavolt has been a one-of there. Vikavolt has been a one-of in Aurora Welder Box of all things as an optional counter for water and to make life more awkward for Baby Blown. That's really the only times Vikavolt has been decent. We haven't seen it do well with Amoonguss, Parasect, Lycanroc plus Aurora Energy. None of those have really been successful. Neither has been like a full Cincino type controlling loop your Flare Grunt type build either. Those were all things that I was trying early on with Vikavolt. I had so much hope for the card, but it pretty much... I mean, it wasn't a complete flop because it still has moments in the meta. So I'd probably drop this down to like a 3-star card as like an optional one-of in a handful of decks right now that are all not top-tier threats. But yeah, it never stood on its own 2 feet as its own archetype, which a lot of people were wary of and conscious of. Obviously, it needed stuff like E-Power to still be broken and Stadium. Toxtricity can go down to a 1-star. We gave it 2 for its experimentation. Now people have got that out of their system. Probably won't happen again. And yeah, it's just not strong enough right now. Arctozolt's 1-star. It's one of those fossil guys that no one really cares about. Mimikyu. Ooh, sorry, I've missed one. Mimikyu stopping healing. Not too big of an issue right now in the format. There's so much one-shot going on that we don't really need this tech card, but it's still something to bear in mind as we do go further and further into a VMAX era. There's more likely going to be 2 shots around, so some prevention of healing could be interesting. Mew V, obviously, didn't see much play at all. Again, pretty poor card. Flygon, stage 2. Rhyperior, we did him dirty. Oh no, Rhyperior's actually busted. Okay, so the issue with Rhyperior was I saw that he was a fighting type and immediately thought that Colossal was the best way to accelerate to him, when really this was a welder card all along. And what I really underrepresented was the effect of Drill Run leading into a heavy rock cannon, making it super efficient against tag team Pokemon. The 80 into 210 is a genuine threat if you're the Welder player going second and are able to hit Welder Aurora onto Rhyperior and your opponent leads out of the tag team. It's actually really, really insane. And its typing is obviously still very, very good. Even though it's a 4 energy attack to deal with an Eternatus, the 3 energy attack is still sufficient if they are just going for the 1 attachment per turn game plan. So Rhyperior I will bump all the way up to a 3-star card for exactly Torkoal Welder and the Aurora Welder box, which I believe to be in the mid sort of tier 2 range of decks. I think it's actually one of the most solid Welder decks you can be playing in the format, because it has the most answers to things compared to other Welder decks. So yeah, Rhyperior, I think we did a little bit dirty. Going forward, is there much that changes for the fighting stuff? Well, there's B, but that's a pretty poor supporter. Don't think there's too much else that changes Rhyperior, but the Welder box deck could continue, so because hitting for ×2 weakness is still going to be strong, I think, going forward. So yeah, apologies, Rhyperior, you're decent, and I've played with him myself a lot now, which is funny. Hydreigon, yeah, really hasn't done too much. There's been some highlight reels with Dark Mewtwo based decks, where you try and squall a bunch of energies onto Mewtwo to have a plethora of attacking options. But it's still candy based, and I'm still not a huge fan of it. You can give this 2-star if you want to be generous, but I still think it's like, if I was going to be playing any Rain Dance deck, I'd be playing the water ones for the most part. So yeah, is there any impressive dark stuff coming out from the new set? I'm not too sure there is. Yeah, like I said earlier, Grimmsnarl always going to be worse than Eternatus. Ariados we gave a 2-star treatment, but basically there's no real need for this, because basically any stage 1s that are in Eternatus now are just based for damage, like it's Garbodor and Toxicroak or nothing, basically. So yeah. Galarian Slowbro V. Inexplicably, we gave a 2-star. I actually think this is a pretty poor metric for us. I basically just evaluated it on its like ability. I forgot that it was just a dark basic Pokemon, and dark basic Pokemon just in general are good for Eternatus. And some people trying to improve their mirror matches use things like Slowbro, Vitality Band, as well as Zigzagoon Nets to pile in on a fellow VMAX to be able to actually bop them. Some people have taken it further, obviously, and gone Slowbro plus a ton of Toxicroak to actually have an out against things like Zamazentas and just Luke Metal in general, which is an energy removal style archetype, which is a huge headache for the nature of Eternatus. So dealing a good amount of damage between turns just from poison racking up is a way around those sorts of awkward archetypes. So I will bump Galarian Slowbro V up to a 3-star as an option to play one of the best decks in format in a Poison Eternatus build. And we'll ignore everything that was on this slide because these were Mimi garbage decks. That's why we rated it so low, right? We said that he only has a role in the Mimi garbage, but there was the most obvious answer the whole time, which is just like play it in Eterna. We grossly overrated this Hooper. I mean, we basically didn't see much need to attach to this card ever, and that was kind of the thing that was overlooked. We saw this card as a great attacking option that could also be 30 damage for Eternatus, and when you actually always want to attach to your Eternatuses the entire game, this then becomes a vanilla card which could be better served as other things, like Slowbros Sableye as a out to Zamazenta, Spiritombs as a stronger out to Zamazenta than Hooper. So yeah, he was outclassed by Spiritomb just because 90 damage Assault Gate lost you the game a lot of the time because you weren't attaching to Eternatus. So yeah, basically every dark Pokemon has to serve a different purpose than what Hooper was trying to push out. And Hooper also didn't work alongside Spiritomb as its sort of alternate archetype as well. So I expected it to be very, very strong in 2 decks. One of the decks flopped, the other deck didn't actually want to attach to anything but its main attacker, so it became a lot less useful. So it still can see like a 1 or 2 of in Eternatus, but at the moment I'm even seeing that as rare, so I would bump this all the way down to 2 stars, I think, from the huge 5-star treatment that we gave it earlier. I initially thought this would be as many of a 3 or 4 copies in Eternatus. I was super, super high on this card, but it just wasn't necessary, to be honest. Crobat, we all know, is 5-star, will continue to be the case. Eterna, yes, still very, very strong. We got the hammers, the drills in there. You can see I didn't have Spiritomb in here, but we had Hoopers, but pretty much everything else. I remember sort of saying that Weavile was popular alongside, well, in the Japanese meta, obviously didn't translate over. Obstagoon was never played. It was just Zigzagoon and spam scoop up nets. Also, we missed the ball. Oh, sorry, we took our eye off the ball for the poison approach. Basically, I thought if Weavar's too clunky, so will setting up 3 Toxicroaks, but apparently not. People are still trying to make that work, and doing okay with it, to be honest. So yeah, this Galarian Obstagoon we actually got in Champion's Path and not Darkness Ablaze, but we can still rate it now that we have this card, and it is obviously terrible. Scizor V and VMAX, one of the slightly more overrated ones from the community. Obviously, this is just not doing enough damage, not enough bang for your buck. The Galarian Stunfisk V had a flash in the pan, but sort of faded out of popularity quite quickly in Luke Metal. Luke Metal, one of the stronger archetypes in this meta. Obviously, kind of gatekept by some big fire decks that are still around, but in general, Stunfisk isn't the answer to those problems. And Kling Klang, obviously a poor stage 1. Copperaja, a poor stage 2 for Kling Klang. An expensive stage 1 for Copperaja. We have a Revenge Kangaskhan, now has a small niche with that Twin Energy synergy for Altaria decks, being able to retaliate KO things that have just knocked out your Altaria, with the hope that you can run them out of answers. I don't think Kangaskhan is necessarily the only way you can play Altaria. So obviously I thought that Obstagoon was going to be its BFF because that's what works with Decidueye. There's also some people playing it with just Kangaskhan. There are people just playing it with Birdkeeper and Swanna. I feel like Obstagoon is still the correct way you should try and play an Altaria deck, but you certainly can play one Kangaskhan, so I'll bump that up to 2 stars for that option. Dunsparce, didn't see any play for controlling decks. Obviously, Belelba banned, so that hurts. That hurts all these ratings for controlling stuff. 1 star. Salamence we rated 3 stars. Some of the community, there was a bit of a divide there, really. Most people were putting it minimum 3 stars. It did have many, many options. Very versatile card. A lot going for it, but the numbers just really weren't there. Kind of outclassed by Inteleon in the end as a spreading approach if you really wanted to. So those are things to bear in mind. You do gain the new goggles that you can put on your eyeballs to give yourself more damage against V and GX Pokemon, which is actually pretty dangerous. Transflight could be doing a 60 spread to like every Crobat against Eternatus, which is pretty wild. Like, you could win in 3 turns just by announcing Transflight 3 times, which is pretty wild, but you could still get outraced by Eternatus just hitting your face 3 times anyways, so that may still be a little bit weak. So there is some hope for Salamence, and spread in general could be getting stronger. I really do think those telescope goggles, or whatever they're called, have a lot of potential. But I still am not sure if Salamence is going to be the way to carry that forward. So I don't think I'll be rating this above 3 stars again. Lightning doesn't get too much better from Vivid Voltage, which was a surprise to me because I thought the hint was in the name Vivid Voltage. I thought we'd be getting another onslaught of lightning support and better attackers, but the Pikachu doesn't seem that strong. And then there's just like a Raikou and a couple other random lightning types that don't change the meta too much. So there's no new hurdles for Salamence too much, and it does gain a few pieces, but I don't think it's the best abuser of the goggles that we have available to us. So probably put this down to a 2 star as experimentation has started to sort of wean off, and we're getting more strict with the meta. Greedent, I'm glad we rated this 1 star. We weren't baited. Its damage output is too low. Corviknight, we accepted that there's a lot of cool synergy here, but there was no real home for the card, and it was too many spaces. I certainly do still sort of have that mentality, but there is the new Togekiss VMAX that could potentially piece together something like this to make a puzzle work, where you're healing a Togekiss over and over again, and the Togekiss then searches out your next Scoop Up Net Rare Candy combo or whatever for the following turn. So it's a small, very niche thing. I've only theory crafted. I haven't had much testing with Togekiss Corviknight just yet. It may not even be the best way to play Togekiss, but it was just something that I noted from the next set. But at the moment, it has to, it didn't see a single bit of play going ahead. So yeah, that was Darkness Ablaze. A couple of things where we were a little bit off. If we go to the review, we were a little bit over on Turbo Patch, a little bit harsh on Birdkeeper, a little bit ambitious on Rose. We undersold Kabu because we didn't expect Green's Welder-based decks to still be as relevant as they are, but they certainly have kept up. The stadiums, aren't hugely wrong. Like Glimwood Tangle got better since Champion's Path, I guess, and these are still fairly low ratings. The special energies all still doing pretty okay. And for the Pokemon, pretty solid on the majority of things. The obvious 5 stars are all there. Hooper was overestimated because it didn't end up working out in Eternatus. Galarian Slowbro got sort of given a short deal there. We gave Houndoom the 2 just for experimentation, just wasn't worth it. Salamence, we all anticipated it being like the 3rd best VMAX of the set, and it turns out it was the case, but by a larger margin than we first expected. The Mad Party stuff didn't set the world alight, which I'm glad we were sort of stubborn on. And Vikavolt kind of overrated because it could never really stand up on its own 2 feet. And Rhyperior, we did dirty. That's pretty much the review of the set review. I think we did pretty well overall. Vivid Voltage, I'm just pre-warning you, we're going to be harsh on that set. I don't think there are many good cards from Vivid Voltage, to be honest. So there's a lot of building block stuff. There's a lot of like interesting abilities. So it'll be a long set review just because we'll be explaining what, you know, what purposes these cards could be serving and where they could fit into the meta. But they're not necessarily sort of like hitting the ground running and being very, very strong from the outset. So this is kind of like a building block set, which is actually really good, I think, as well, because Sword and Shield, Rebel Clash, and Darkness Ablaze all brought a ton of power to the sets and a ton of influence and change in the meta. And it's cool to see that they're sort of hitting the brakes on for a little bit and giving us a bit of breathing room. I know a lot of people are kind of concerned about how stale the format's getting as they've gone through this meta, and some people are sort of fretting that there won't be enough change going into the next set. But I do think there's still a few things here and there that we'll be adapting to keep an eye on. And I think there's enough experimental, fun, interesting cards and different ways of tweaking archetypes that will keep us entertained through Vivid Voltage. Just a small interlude before we get into the main set review, hopefully in the next couple of days. So check back to tomorrow or the next day for the main set review of Vivid Voltage. It'll be super interesting with myself and Jack. But yeah, that's been the Darkness Ablaze review of the review. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you did enjoy, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.